Ladies and gentlemen, there are moments in life when the most powerful thing you can do is not to speak, but to remain silent. We live in a world that glorifies noise, that tells us we must always have an answer, always defend ourselves, always prove our point. But wisdom, real wisdom, teaches us the opposite, that silence at the right time is not weakness but strength. Tonight, I want to take you into 5 such moments where silence has the power to protect your dignity, preserve your relationships, and align you with truth itself. There are moments in life when silence is not only the best option but the only option if you wish to preserve your future. And one of those moments, perhaps the most crucial, is when your anger has you in its grip. Because let's be honest, anger is not just an emotion, it is a force. It hijacks your body, it clouds your judgment, and it makes you believe that you are justified in saying things you will later regret. In that instant, when your anger controls you, your tongue becomes a weapon sharper than any blade, and the wounds it leaves are not visible on the skin, but in the hearts of those around you, and often, those wounds last far longer than you imagine. Think about it, how many relationships, how many friendships, how many careers have been destroyed because of a single outburst that could not be contained? How many times have you, in your own life, looked back at something you said in the heat of anger and wished desperately that you could take it back? Yet the cruel thing about words is that once spoken, they cannot be undone, they take on a life of their own. They echo, they linger, they shape how others see you, and sometimes, they define you in their eyes forever. Anger convinces us of its righteousness. When we are angry, we feel powerful, we feel justified, we feel as though we must act, we must retaliate, we must speak to restore balance or to punish the one who offended us. But here's the trap, in almost every situation, anger narrows our perception, it makes the world black and white. It strips away nuance, it blinds us to complexity, and it tells us that the only way forward is through confrontation. Yet life, in its deepest reality, is not black and white, it is layered, paradoxical, and fragile. Silence in a moment of anger is not suppression, it is a recognition that the self you are when angry is not the self you want guiding the direction of your life. Philosophically, this is an ancient idea. In the Stoic tradition, anger was considered one of the most dangerous passions because it dethrones reason, which is the very faculty that makes us human. To allow anger to speak for you is to momentarily abandon your highest self and let the most primal, impulsive part of you take the microphone. And that's why silence is so powerful here, because silence in anger is not passivity, it is restraint, it is saying to yourself, I will not let this temporary storm dictate my permanent character. Psychologically, anger is energy, and like all energy, it must be directed. If it explodes outward in speech, it often burns everything in its path, but if it is held, if it is channeled, it can be transformed. The very energy of anger can be redirected into discipline, into determination, into clarity of thought, but that transformation requires a pause, and that pause is silence. You see, silence is not an absence, it is a space, it is the space where reflection has time to enter, where reason can catch up with emotion, and where you regain sovereignty over yourself. Imagine for a moment a father yelling at his child in uncontrolled anger. The words may be harsh, disproportionate, even cruel. And years later, that child may not remember the context of the argument at all, but the words will remain etched in their memory, shaping their sense of worth. Now imagine that same father feeling the same surge of rage, but instead of shouting, he withdraws into silence, he breathes, he composes himself. In the short term, that silence may feel uncomfortable, but in the long term, it spares the relationship from scars that words would surely carve. That is the quiet power of silence, and we must recognize this. Silence in anger is not weakness, nor is it cowardice. On the contrary, it is one of the greatest demonstrations of strength. Anyone can lash out, it takes no discipline to throw words like stones. But to hold back, to remain silent when every nerve in your body screams for release, that is mastery. That is strength of character. So the next time you feel anger rising like fire in your chest, remember this. Silence is not your enemy, it is your ally. It is the wall that prevents you from burning bridges you will later need. It is the shield that guards your dignity when your emotions threaten to strip it away, and it is the discipline that ensures your tomorrow is not ruined by what you could not control today. Because in the end, it is better to remain silent in anger and be thought wise, than to speak in anger and be proven a fool. There are moments when silence is not simply the absence of words but the very presence of wisdom, and this becomes clearest when listening carries more weight than speaking. Think about how much of our communication is often motivated not by a desire to understand, but by a desire to reply. Most people don't listen, they wait for their turn to speak, they treat conversation as a competition, not as an exploration. But silence changes this dynamic completely. When you fall silent in the presence of another person, you create space. You allow their words to unfold fully, without interruption, without distortion, and in that space, truth often emerges, truth that would have been smothered had you been eager to assert your own opinion too quickly. There's something profoundly humbling about recognizing that in most situations, the person in front of you knows something you don't. They carry experiences, perceptions, and insights that are alien to your own, and if you rush to speak, to fill the air with your certainty, you shut yourself off from the very thing that could expand you. Silence, therefore, is not passivity, it is active receptivity. It is the discipline of acknowledging that wisdom is more likely to enter you when your mouth is closed and your ears are open. Consider this in the context of relationships. So many arguments escalate not because the issues are insurmountable, but because both sides insist on being heard before they are willing to listen. But if one person, in that moment of tension, chooses silence, not the silence of withdrawal but the silence of attentiveness, something remarkable happens. The other person feels seen, they feel that their words matter, and in that recognition, the emotional charge begins to dissolve. Listening with silence has the power to de-escalate conflict in ways that no clever argument or raised voice ever could. And it's not only in relationships with others, it's also in your relationship with yourself. If you are constantly speaking, constantly distracting yourself with noise, with conversation, with activity, when do you ever truly listen to your own inner voice? There are truths that lie dormant within us, waiting to be heard, but they only rise in silence. The silence of listening is not merely interpersonal, it is intrapersonal. It is in quiet reflection, in listening carefully to what your conscience whispers, that you discover who you are and what you must do. Philosophers and sages throughout history understood this. In Eastern traditions, silence is often revered as the gateway to wisdom. The Taoist master listens to the rhythms of the world before he speaks a word. The Stoics, too, reminded us that the wise man speaks little and listens much. Why? Because they knew that speech is an act of expenditure, but listening is an act of accumulation. Every time you speak, you give away what you already know. Every time you listen, you gather what you did not yet possess. That is the simple equation of growth. Psychologically, there is another dimension to this. People reveal more of themselves in the presence of silence than they do in the presence of constant chatter. When you resist the urge to interrupt, when you let someone continue unfolding their thoughts, they often reveal what is most authentic, the truths that are buried beneath their initial words. This is why silence is one of the greatest tools of a good therapist. They know that if they listen long enough, the patient will eventually disclose what truly matters. In that sense, silence is not just listening, it is allowing others to discover their own truth by hearing themselves speak. And here is the paradox: silence in listening actually strengthens your voice, because when you do finally speak, your words carry weight. They are not hurried, they are not reactive, they are informed, they emerge from the depth of having truly absorbed the world around you. People who speak constantly are rarely remembered. People who speak rarely, but with precision, with timing, and with clarity, those are the voices that echo. So when you find yourself in conversation, remember this: your silence is not emptiness, it is the soil in which understanding takes root. By choosing to listen instead of rushing to respond, you demonstrate not only humility but also strength, the strength to prioritize truth over ego. And in a world filled with noise, the rare person who listens deeply becomes magnetic, because they offer what so few people receive: genuine attention. In the end, speaking may make you heard, but silence, when used wisely, will make you understood. There is another situation where silence becomes not only wise but necessary, when you realize that the person in front of you is determined to misunderstand you. And I don't mean when someone simply fails to grasp your point and needs clarification, that's different. I mean when you recognize that no matter how carefully you explain yourself, no matter how honest or reasonable you try to be, they are not listening to understand. They are listening to twist, to attack, to dismiss. In that moment, the pursuit of explanation becomes not an act of communication, but a trap. And silence is your only way out. You see, some people are not after truth, they are after victory. Their goal is not to understand you but to entangle you. They bait you into defending yourself, into justifying every word, and the more you speak, the deeper you sink into their net. They take your words out of context, they reinterpret your intentions, and they leave you exhausted, frustrated, and misunderstood. And if you are not careful, you end up giving them exactly what they want: your energy, your peace, and your credibility. This is why silence in the face of deliberate misunderstanding is not weakness, it is strategy. It is the refusal to play a game that has been rigged from the beginning. Because here's the truth: you cannot win an argument with someone who has already decided not to hear you. You cannot reason with someone who has no interest in reason. To continue trying is to drain yourself for no reward. Silence, then, is not surrender, it is an act of self-respect. Think about the countless times you've wasted hours explaining yourself to someone who didn't actually want clarity. Maybe it was a colleague, a relative, or even a stranger online. You repeated yourself, you gave examples, you softened your tone, you raised your tone, you appealed to logic, to emotion, and none of it mattered. They weren't trying to see you clearly, they were trying to keep you entangled, and in those moments, what you needed was not another argument but the strength to stop talking. Philosophically, this is tied to the principle of conserving your logos, your word, your speech, your rational essence. Speech is sacred. It is the medium through which truth takes shape in the world. To pour that gift into a vessel that refuses to receive it is to dishonor it. And worse, it cheapens the truth, because when you continue to argue with someone who mocks or distorts your words, you make the truth appear weaker than it is. Silence protects the dignity of truth by refusing to cast it before those who have no intention of valuing it. Psychologically, there is also a trap here. When someone is determined to misunderstand you, they create an emotional pull. You feel the urge to prove yourself, to set the record straight, to be seen as you really are. That urge is powerful, because being misunderstood threatens something deep within us: the fear of being wrongly judged, the fear of being misrepresented. But if you give in to that urge, you hand them control, you give them the ability to dictate not only your words but your state of mind. Silence breaks that control. It says, "You may misunderstand me if you wish, but I will not sacrifice my peace trying to convince you otherwise." Consider how this applies in your everyday life. Perhaps you've had conversations where you felt cornered by someone who simply would not hear you. You felt your blood pressure rise, your words tumble out faster, and afterwards you walked away drained, replaying everything you said, wondering if you could have phrased it differently. But the truth is, nothing you said would have changed the outcome, because they were never listening in the first place. The only thing that would have preserved your strength was silence, and silence has another power here: it reveals. When you stop defending yourself to someone who is determined to misunderstand you, you expose their intentions, their hostility becomes obvious, their lack of sincerity becomes visible, and others can see what you saw all along. Your silence, paradoxically, speaks louder than your defense ever could. So when you encounter this kind of situation, remember this: you do not owe endless explanations to people who have chosen not to understand you. You do not owe constant defense to those who twist your words. You owe yourself the discipline to remain silent, the wisdom to conserve your energy, and the strength to let your actions, not your endless words, testify to your truth. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can say to someone who is determined to misunderstand you is nothing at all. There is yet another moment when silence is not only appropriate but absolutely necessary, when the truth itself requires no defense. And this may be the most difficult of all, because we are naturally inclined to protect what we believe is right. When we know we stand on the side of truth, we want to argue for it, to prove it, to convince everyone around us. But here's the paradox: truth, when it is genuine, has a way of sustaining itself without our constant intervention. To feel the need to overdefend it is often to reveal our own insecurity in it. Think of the strongest truths in your life. Gravity doesn't need to be defended. The sunrise doesn't need your words to validate its existence. No one has to argue that fire burns, it simply does. And in the same way, when a truth about your life, your character, or your principles is solid, you don't need to fight endlessly to prove it. The truth is like bedrock, unmoving, undeniable, and there whether or not people acknowledge it, but this is where many people stumble. They believe that if they don't defend the truth loudly enough, it will somehow be weakened. They fear that silence equals defeat, that if they don't speak, falsehood will prevail. Yet often, it is the opposite. The more you scramble to defend what is obvious, the more you dilute its strength. Your anxious defense signals to others that perhaps the truth isn't as strong as you claim, whereas silence demonstrates confidence that the truth can withstand scrutiny without your endless explanations. Philosophically, this connects to the ancient recognition that truth possesses a self-authenticating quality. In time, falsehood collapses under its own weight, but truth endures. The wise understood that truth has a resilience independent of human approval, and so, to argue ceaselessly is to misunderstand the very nature of truth. It is not fragile, it does not require constant protection, it requires integrity, your willingness to live it, embody it, and allow time to reveal it. Psychologically, there's a deeper layer here. When you rush to defend yourself against every accusation, when you leap into explanations every time someone doubts you, you become enslaved to their perception of you. You make their approval the measure of your reality, and that is dangerous, because once your peace and your confidence are tied to whether others acknowledge your truth, you've handed over your power. Silence breaks that dependence. Silence says, the truth exists whether you acknowledge it or not. My life will testify louder than my words ever could. Think about the courtroom. A lawyer who argues frantically, who interrupts, who never allows silence, often signals insecurity in their case. But the lawyer who knows the evidence is solid can remain composed, can allow space, can even pause, because they trust the truth to carry its own weight. The same applies to you. If you are constantly defending yourself, constantly talking, you appear unsure, but if you hold your silence, if you let your life be the evidence, you radiate strength. And silence has another profound effect. It forces others to confront reality on their own. When you stop defending, stop explaining, you leave space for truth to press itself upon them directly. Sometimes your silence plants seeds that your words never could. Sometimes it is the absence of your defense that makes others finally notice the weight of what is real. In your daily life, this might mean refusing to engage with baseless criticism. It might mean walking away from gossip without correcting every false detail. It might mean declining to justify your choices when you know they are right, even if others don't understand. And while this silence may feel heavy in the moment, over time it builds a reputation of strength. People begin to notice that you don't need to scream to be right. You don't need to fight to be secure. You stand still, and the truth stands with you. But let me be clear. This kind of silence does not mean passivity or cowardice. It does not mean avoiding hard conversations. It means discerning the difference between a battle that requires your voice and a reality that requires only your consistency. And if you can master that distinction, you will not waste your life fighting unnecessary wars. You will conserve your energy for what truly matters, and your silence itself will become a statement louder than words. Because in the end, the truth is like a mountain, unmoved by storms, unmoved by doubters, unmoved by time. And the wisest thing you can do is stand quietly beside it, unshaken, knowing that mountains do not need to explain themselves. So remember this: when the truth needs no defense, let your silence be its witness.